When I got done playing football, we won the national championship January 6, 2014. I started law school August of that same year. So I was still very close with everyone on the team, and very quickly I created an LLC, and it's called Renegade Sports and Entertainment. Renegade obviously being homage to Florida State. And I started doing marketing work for athletes that I had played with who were now in the NFL. So I could not be an NFLPA Certified Contract Advisor because you have to have either a graduate degree or a law degree. However, I'm allowed to represent a professional athlete for marketing purposes. So there are ways that students can get that hands-on experience without necessarily being in that field exclusively.
From the FSU College of Law, I'm Alva Striplin.
And I'm Jeff Kahn.
The greatest legal minds in Florida and around the country have come from the FSU College of Law, and they're not just arguing cases in a courtroom.
From heading up multi-million-dollar companies and state agencies to advising on financial ventures and mergers that are changing the business landscape in Florida, these FSU College alums are
taking care of business. Today's guest is an associate attorney with Brooks LeBoeuf here in Tallahassee, Florida. He is also a graduate of the FSU College of Law. We welcome to the show Paul Aloise. Paul, glad to have you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you guys so much for having me.
We are so glad you came over. We're excited to have you on the show today. We've talked a lot about our students' interest in sports law, but you are our first guest in the space. So I have a feeling this podcast is going to attract just thousands of listeners. They're just going to be all over, hanging on your every word.
I'm hoping it goes viral for you guys.
We're hoping so too, and that there's some royalties that start rolling in, so Jeff and I can retire, and
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's go back a little bit and talk about how you got what's your undergrad in. What was your interest? Did you know you were going to come to law school?
Absolutely. So like we were just talking about before the show, I had from a young age an interest in not only going to law school, but also to be a sports agent. Like we were talking about earlier, I'm Italian. Growing up, my cousin Vinny was a staple movie in our household. So criminal law was something I always had a passion and interest in. And then at a young age, playing Little League Baseball, our head coach was Mark Rogers, who is now famous for representing Russell Wilson in the NFL. Okay. And he also signed a $100 million contract in the early 2000s for pitcher Mike Hampton. So at a young age, I was around these different athletes and this very successful sports agent who also, I believe, is a Florida State law graduate. And he was a contract attorney for years before switching into the role of a sports agent. So from a young age, it was two areas that I was interested in, and being an avid sports fan and also playing sports. And I played football at Florida State. It really got my juices flowing and had a passion to try and do both.
Okay, so you went to undergrad at Florida State.
Yes, ma'am.
Played football.
Yes.
What year was that? Was that one in the national championship years? I'm gonna
Yes.
Go ahead. Just
no,
yes,
absolutely.
it was.
Yes, I was a backup linebacker on the 2013 national championship team.
Nice.
So I had a very fortunate experience to be around Jameis Winston, who was a number 1 overall pick, and just, all 22 players on that team, starting on offense and defense, made it to the NFL. So I had direct exposure to athletes at the highest level, which I think gives me a unique perspective to be able to apply to the work I do now.
I would agree. And when you talk about $100 million, the next word is contract.
Right.
So immediately you shift from sports to law. They need legal assistance when they're, I would imagine, taking that next step in their career.
Absolutely. And what's surprising is that, a lot of these certificates or exams that you have to sit for each professional sports league, whether it's NBA, NFL, MLB, a lot of them do not require you to have a law degree. And so it's kind of surprising to see individuals with all different backgrounds, sometimes representing individuals. And unfortunately, we've heard some of the sad stories of these individuals who played years, made millions of dollars, and then lost it because of poor advisors or making the wrong business or legal decisions.
Mm-hmm. So when you were in law school, you geared the classes you took toward sports. You already knew that that's kind of where you wanted to head.
Yes, both criminal law and sports. I took as many evidence courses as I could, as many sports law classes as I could. And I think for me, starting my own sports agency while I was in law school, the closely held business organization, some of the business courses I took really helped me because I did not have your traditional business background from an undergrad standpoint.
So what was your first job out of law school? Was it your own gig or?
Well, my first legal job out of law school was working as a prosecutor down in West Palm Beach, Florida, in the 15th Judicial Circuit.
Okay. And what was that like?
I loved it.
Did you?
I did. I mean, I was on the mock trial team here at FSU Law, and I did the certified legal internship with Professor Krieger. So I got to actually work as a prosecutor my last summer before graduating down in the 19th Judicial Circuit in my hometown of Martin County, Florida, where I got to do 4 jury trials. So I really found that same competitiveness and ability to put on a show, I mean, for lack of better terms, that I used to have from playing football, I was able to find in the courtroom.
I've seen that in mock trial. I know exactly what you're talking about. I went and watched the mock trial team at the courthouse. They went right down here. I was incredible. They were up there acting. I mean, putting on a show. I was very impressed. Very impressed. I don't know how you guys do it on the spot like that. I asked one of the students that was here, and you don't know the questions ahead of time, right? And she's like, absolutely not.
Right,
they
exactly.
Can throw anything at you. Well, let me turn it over to Jeff and see what you think.
Well, one of the things you mentioned before we were rolling was you, and I assume you took it here at Florida State College of Law. You took the sports law course, but you're right. Traditionally, sports law is kind of a misnomer for the course because it really ends up just kind of being contracts and antitrust and labor law with a sports twist, right? It's cases involving sport athletes or leagues, but it really is antitrust or labor law primarily. But the world has changed, obviously, with NIL, with college athletes being able to earn money. It's a different world maybe than the course was when I took it millions of years ago. So what, what's your opinion on that? What if you were making a sports law course, if you were going to teach that, how would you shift what gets taught? What would you emphasize more maybe than has been in the past?
I think it's really shifting it to more of a practical standpoint of what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Because I do understand and appreciate the history of the antitrust laws and how sports got to where they are now. But because those antitrust laws were litigated, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, we don't have those same issues presented in front of us today. So I think, you hit the nail on the head that the NIL laws now are different from state to state, and they're even different from an institutional level at the NCAA. So I think it's important for anybody who's trying to get into that field to understand that whether it's a professional league or whether it's NIL, there are a lot of different governing bodies that are overseeing you. And I really think it would be more practical for the law students to get a more fundamental basis on what statutes, what rules, what regulations, and what governing bodies are really overseeing you, and then how to properly navigate the world by both a legal perspective, but like we've talked about from a business perspective as well, because though I think it is tremendously helpful to have a law degree, you need to know as much about business as you do about law to truly, I think, be a complete marketing representative or be a complete sports agent for these professional athletes. So I think giving these individuals the tools to be, well advised in multiple areas and actually have maybe, and I know that there's a competition, I believe at Tulane, where they get to actually go out there and, do an arbitration. I think it's with MLB, but I think maybe to meet with athletes or get it to actually look at some of these different contracts and learn where you can actually negotiate and where you're just kind of being there and making sure that the player is understanding what's going on. A big part of my job is making sure, just like in the legal world, that my client understands the process. Because sometimes, as we all know, we as lawyers are bound by the laws and statutes that were in front of us, and we're just kind of a mediator and making sure that everyone is understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like, if you were kind of creating a package for somebody said to you, I want to go to law school, but I want to be a sports agent. Obviously they take the sports law, they might change it around a bit, but I'm hearing contract drafting, administrative law, right? Which is not something that normally would have jumped out, right? But you're in this world of as you said, you've got layers of regulation on you. You've got to understand those layers and understand what you can play with within those. Right. And administrative law deals with that, not on the sports level, but as a macro level. on the business side, you mentioned closely held business is one way that you sort of got some background into the business world. Are there other courses that jumped out, or other courses you look back and think, I wish I had taken that? And it may not even be in the law school. My financial. We have a course on interpretation of financial statements, which may not be as important to a sports agent, but we try to bring that kind of financial wherewithal within the course or in the classroom.
Right. I know in undergrad, my two majors were criminology and sport management. So there's obviously a theme of me understanding that I was interested in both fields. I took a sports law class in undergrad, and I took a sports finance course, which I think gives you some of the bare bone tools, but I think it does give you a broader understanding of everything that's going on in the sports world and some of the overlap that both being in the business side of sports has with the legal side. But then in law school, I would say the other class outside of closely held business organization, I believe the title was contract drafting, and I believe it was with Professor Benham, and he is someone, again, who has real-world practice, which I think is so important because the theories are equally as important, and that you need to learn to have a fundamental basis of what law is and why it's important and why case law comes into play. But then actually figuring out how to implement it, I think, is equally as important. And I think we've seen, especially at Florida State, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Florida State grad, I've spoken with students from so many other law schools. I think Florida State is kind of at the forefront of actually helping students implement and practice law as opposed to just teaching it. And to me, I think getting into those types of courses where you're actually practicing and getting some real world hands-on experience is so important. And I would say mock trial is just as important, and moot court, because you're speaking in front of other people and you're having to be persuasive. And being a sports agent, whether you're trying to get a client to sign with you, get a professional team to take a chance on them, or negotiating an off-field marketing deal, you need to have the ability to be persuasive with your speech.
Yeah, sell yourself, basically.
Correct.
Right? And it doesn't matter if you're a sports agent or an attorney, as you said.
Right.
You in the end, you are your best asset, and you've got to sell that. All right, well, let me finish with one last question. I've been kind of asking this, but I'm very interested to hear your thought on this. How do we take those skills that you're mentioning that you need to be a successful agent? Because a lot of students love sports and want to do this. How do you turn that into a practical experience? Something, other than an externship where they can go and work with an agent or work at a marketing firm. How could we create a simulation that would be useful for the students to see what it's like, what you do, right?
I think that the NIL laws are now allowing different individuals to be able to represent athletes at a younger age. So I think that because of NIL laws, there actually could be something here at Florida State where law students, maybe it's as a collection or as a class, could help negotiate a contract for a Florida State athlete. It doesn't have to be football. Our women's soccer team, our women's softball team are some of the best teams in the country. So I think whether it's female sports, whether it's male sports, we have the relationship with the university, and individuals who are in law school, I'm not saying that they know everything, but they obviously have a good understanding of what to look for and maybe, to issue spot what's going on. So I think that there might be a way for students at Florida State Law to be in a course that allows them to work hands-on with FSU Athletics Department and be able to help reach out to different companies to try and get these athletes marketing deals. And the reason I say that is because when I got done playing football, we won the national championship January 6, 2014. I started law school August of that same year. So I was still very close with everyone on the team, and very quickly I created an LLC, and it's called Renegade Sports and Entertainment. Renegade obviously being homage to Florida State. And I started doing marketing work for athletes that I had played with who were now in the NFL. So I could not be an NFLPA Certified Contract Advisor because you have to have either a graduate degree or a law degree. However, I'm allowed to represent a professional athlete for marketing purposes. So there are ways that students can get that hands-on experience without necessarily being in that field exclusively.
Yeah, we've mentioned. Go ahead. Sorry,
No,
I know where you're
it.
going.
Go.
Well, we have a business clinic, and Richard Benham, the professor you mentioned, who does teach contract drafting, runs that clinic, and we have made those connections with athletes. Our students met with did a sort of presentation on NIL, and my sense is if there is, if any person needs that clinic is a perfect opportunity for the athlete and the law students to get connected.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity. The class, they actually, sounds like it was more like a athlete/legal roundtable. They got to actually ask questions, and these are the things. And I think it brought to light a lot of things that maybe the students hadn't thought of. They thought,
Right.
contract, but a lot of it, I remember them talking about, like social media deals or bartering that, hey, I'll give you, free meals for a month if you post this on social media. So it didn't always involve just a cash transaction. There was so much more to it involved in that.
Correct.
And this is just such a new concept for schools and such a game changer. I think that you're spot on in that it's a great opportunity for our students here at Florida State, and Professor Benham is absolutely integrating that into his business law curriculum. So yeah, y'all were on the same brainwave.
I love it.
Absolutely.
No, I love his course, and he's someone I've stayed in contact with, here and there throughout the years since graduating, just because I took so much from being able to sit in a smaller class size and be hands-on with drafting a contract and just hearing some real-world, war stories, as we like to call them, of him dealing with contracts.
I think we have quite a number of students here that want to go into sports law, but you're a living, breathing example that you can actually do that. You can love what you do and enjoy your career if you merge the two together. So I think you're a great testament to follow your dream, man.
All you got to do is win a national championship.
Well, you did have that bonus.
That definitely helped. It definitely helped.
Usually I ask people, so what other career would you choose if you could not do anything in the law? But I'm not going to ask that because I think I know what he would say,
so.
right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you something different. What's the most either unusual or really stands out in your mind as something crazy that's happened to you while you've been practicing with either a player or an athlete or something that just you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm involved in this. No names.
Right.
You protect the innocent.
I mean, I think that kind of like what you were saying, when you actually sit down and speak at a round table with athletes, you see the different roles you have to quickly play. And I think that that's something that I absolutely didn't completely understand. You think you do, but you don't know until you jump in. And I think that very early on, when I was still working as a prosecutor and so hadn't had a ton of experience in other areas of law, but very quickly was being asked questions from my clients and their families about lease agreements, about, okay, the school, his previous school kicked him out. He went to another school. However, the lease agreement that he signed in the previous school was never handled. So there was a contract in place. And then the athlete, of course, doesn't think about that, doesn't realize that, because they're focused on sports and they think, okay, once my scholarship was resolved at the other school, everything else was resolved. But we actually ended up finding out the hard way that his leasing contract was never canceled. It was still running. There was never payments made on it. So he had a full 12-month lease that was sent to collections. And we did not find out about that until he was in the NFL trying to get an apartment in a new state, in a new city. And he had this major debt that the collections agency was looking out for.
Wow.
So now I quickly had to, and I think at the time that I actually was started to resolve that issue, I was in the private sector, but it was just crazy to see how universities sometimes, once that athlete leaves, become completely hands-off, and how there is a major gap between what the player realizes going on and what's going on behind the scenes, and how he now is an adult, he's a professional, but now has a major obstacle to overcome because this collections agency is asking for $12,000, $15,000, which he just doesn't have on hand. But we also need housing right away because he needs to be in a new city to play for an NFL team. So that was one of the first things that was very stressful. And, on top of everything else I'm doing day to day as an attorney and as a sports agent, was just a new layer that I had to take on.
I didn't know there were lease agreements between athletes.
Well, he was in I assume a privately owned apartment is
Yes.
what you mean. Yeah. So
But the university was involved in that agreement?
Well, I think the university at least helped coordinate it, whether it was and maybe the athlete just didn't necessarily understand the entire process, but they're given a certain amount of stipend per NCAA guidelines, and oftentimes athletes use that NCAA stipend to pay for their apartments.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And so I think that the athlete just thought that, okay, I'm no longer at this university, I'm no longer on scholarship. So that's gone. But that was a separate private agreement that he had entered into within a private apartment complex. And so the university really was not involved with it. But these athletes just don't realize the dichotomy between the two.
Right. So I think I'm hearing you're a fan of NIL. You see the reasons and justifications behind it. What's the one thing you could change about NIL if you could?
Universal guidelines. And I think one regulatory body. And, everyone says, okay, well, the NCAA is the universal regulatory body, but they're really not, because each state has their own rules and interpretations of it. And I also think that there needs to be a more universal governing body for athlete agents as a whole. But staying on the topic of NIL, in Florida, the rule is that you can either be an attorney to help these student athletes, or you could be registered as an athlete agent, which is just a business license that you get through the state. And to be an NFLPA Certified Contract Advisor in Florida, if I want to speak with current Florida State college football players before they're leaving to go to the NFL, I have to have that license anyway. So I was already dual certified as a Florida athlete agent and also was an attorney. But, going back to what we were talking about earlier, FSU students in a certain course could go get that athlete agent license and then properly register with the university to make sure that they are following all the protocols that they need to comply and then represent athletes. But I think that if there was one governing body handling everything, overseeing everything, it would prevent the wrong people from getting in contact with the athletes, and I think it would ensure more compliance with the rules and regulations.
Surely there's a division coming that's going to make that happen, maybe within the NCAA or outside of it, but then you're also dealing with a variance in state laws as well. So I would imagine that's going to be a huge challenge to set an overseeing body that governs nationwide.
Correct. And I think that on top of that, you see the wide varying amounts of money that is going into NIL. Some athletes, obviously, because of their status, are getting bigger deals. But at what point do those need to be regulated? Because at what point then is that student athlete moniker that the NCAA has always used really just being completely knocked off? Because now this person really is not a student anymore.
Right.
He is a full-fledged professional making millions of dollars. And I do think it's going to negatively impact that athlete's desire to continue to perform and play at the next level, because now they're not striving for that $1 million contract. They're getting that now before they've ever really performed on the football field. And I know I'm saying football because that's kind of what I'm in, but it applies to all sports, men and women's.
Well, and I think predominantly that's what we're seeing with NIL. It seems to be affecting football more so than any other sport, in totality. So I completely understand where you're coming from. All right. Well, we're going to shift just a little bit. Some quick answer questions before we let you go back to your sports agent legal world. It sounds like you have a lot going on. So super easy. Let's just get to know Paul just a little bit better. How do you take your coffee?
Depends. In the morning, as of late, mostly just black coffee. But if it's an afternoon one, then I like to add a little hazelnut creamer to it.
Okay. Iced coffee in the afternoon. I'm an iced coffee in the afternoon, especially because it's so
well,
hot.
in the summer, definitely. Yeah. But I do, growing up, my mom's a big coffee drinker, so we always had a coffee pot. Like, again, we're Italian family, so there's coffee being dripped at the house 24/7.
I get it. And we're black coffee drinkers. We don't have many on the show, but I found it's an inherited. My dad drank it that way. I didn't know coffee came with anything else in it.
My dad's the same way. My mom likes it as a brown paper bag color. That's how much milk she wants in it. So she'll be happy I made that reference today. But definitely over the years, my dad has instilled upon me that I should be drinking black coffee. And as I've gotten older, it's definitely become easier to do.
Yep, I hear you. All right, what's the one habit you wish you could break?
I really do not turn my phone off or stop working, and I give all my clients my personal cell phone, whether it's legal or sports. And you'd be surprised the number of clients that hit you up on a Friday night at 10 o'clock.
Of course.
So I think if I had to break a habit, it would be to not necessarily give out my cell phone to all of my clients.
Put the phone down.
Put the phone down and kind of unplug for a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of us. Our personal and professional worlds have blended with that cell phone. There's no shutdown time.
Absolutely.
All right. And what is one movie you could watch over and over again? You love it. You can't say My Cousin Vinny because you can't say that. We've already touched that. Give me another one.
Really love The Dark Knight, the second one with Heath Ledger when he plays the Joker and Batman. And obviously, Two-Face in that, Harvey Dent, he's a prosecutor, so there's a little legal background in that as well. But that's a movie from start to finish. And I would also say Shawshank Redemption. That's one that I watched in high school in like a law studies course and just became a huge fan of it.
That's a good one. I was kind of thinking you might go toward Rudy.
I do love Rudy.
I am a huge Rudy fan. I don't cry at movies, and I will tear up at that movie every time.
It makes you want to go run through a wall and go work out no matter what time it is. If you're watching it from midnight to 2 a.m., you're not going to be able to go to sleep after
Just
that.
Inspirational, man. Inspirational. All right. Well, we so appreciate you coming on the show today, sharing your insight with our listeners, and really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. This podcast made possible by a generous donation from Jeff and Aggie Stoops.
Special thanks to FSU College of Law's Professor Sean Barron for creating our theme music.